Hey, Facebook Online. This is Travis, and I'm here with Adam Weber, and we're excited to be here. We're going through 1 Samuel. Again, this is our last one, though.
Last one.
I've really had fun with this, just sitting here and talking to you about the Bible, basically.
Yeah, I've genuinely enjoyed this as well. This has been really good.
Just going back, I know this is something, months ago, we decided, what if we try to do that and add a story? And so if this is something you like and you like us to do it in the future, because we're going to have to do 2 Samuel at some point, I'm guessing now.
At some point.
Let us know, because we had a lot of fun with this. And if this is something people like, we might have to do this again sometime. But first, before we get into what's in our little yellow books, I want to talk about your message today just a little bit. In what world did you think it was great to start your message off with your son peeing? What part of you thought that would be a good way?
As you know, we almost cut it several times because we went back and forth.
I set you up. I know the answer a little bit.
Yeah, but when I got to Saul's story and I found out that legitimately it was him using the bathroom in the Bible, I'm like, we gotta use this.
The funny thing about that is we had to do some serious exegesis, studying the passage, to find out if that was what was really happening.
Yeah, I'm like, is this actually what he did? Like, did he go in and go pee or not? So we had to research it. What was the one meaning that you thought was so funny?
The one meaning, was been translated, he covered his feet. Instead, if he went to use a restaurant, he covered his feet. And I was like, well, what did he cover his feet with? If he was going, funny. You got it? Did you get that?
Yes.
So he covered his feet was one of the translations. And then it was just go use the restroom or pee. It pretty much sounds like, he was
going to the bathroom.
Yeah. From the best that we could tell from the translation. If there's an Old Testament scholar on here, please correct us if we're wrong. But everything we looked into, that's what it meant.
Feel free to correct us. We might be wrong.
What was your favorite part of the message today?
Don't compromise your character. That for me was my favorite part this time, because everything in those moments, everything will tempt you to do so. And the person with low character, whether it's you or I or somebody else, that will always come to the surface. Mm-hmm. It always does. It may not come out how you want it to if you're the one being hurt or wronged. It may not come out in the timing you want it to, but poor character will always come to the surface in times of being challenged. Somehow, some way, it'll come to the surface. And so you can't control what people are saying about you. This is stuff that got cut. You can't control your reputation, but you can control your character. And so in those moments, I think just don't compromise your character. Don't compromise your character. And it's so hard not to. But God honors what we do in private. He honors what we do. He honors a good character. And so I think that was my favorite part. Was there a part that stuck out for you?
Yeah, that was a good part. I think one of the most interesting things was let God be the judge.
Yeah.
For me, we don't often think of God being a judge as comforting. But if you've been seriously wronged, if you really think about it, it can be a very comforting thing. I remember, I'm going to butcher this, but it was someone in a country where there had been some sort of genocide or something, and one person said the only way I can get through what happened to my family was understanding the justice of God. Yeah. That God would just pay vengeance, but that God would make it right. Like God would judge what happened. And I think that's an interesting way of being able to let go when you've gone through something really hard, when you trust that God will judge. You just see that so clearly from what David said there, that's what he was. He was trusting that God would judge Saul and what he had done to him. So that was a really interesting part for me, I thought.
Yeah, and he uses really strong words in that section too. What David says to Saul is pretty strong. Let God basically avenge the wrongs that have been done to me. And honestly, in some ways, when we've been deeply wronged, it's really one of the main things that brings freedom. I mean, when you've definitely been wronged or hurt or just taken advantage of or manipulated into something, I feel like for me, that's one of the main ways that I'm able to let go is just to know, God, you're a God who makes all things right. And that's wonderful for the times that I've been hurt. It's also a little bit fearful. What's the one T-shirt? Only God can be my judge.
Only God can judge.
Yeah. What did you mention that this last week?
Oh, don't you now? People are going to judge me for what I say. Like I don't like those shirts like only God can judge. And so whenever I see someone that's wearing only God can judge, I'm like, yeah, and he does. Like, you're right, I can't. But you'd rather have me be your judge than God. Well, and once again, I'm making God sound out of like this sniper God or something like that. Like God's a loving Father as well, but I mean, God, he judges the thoughts and the intentions of our heart, and it's not good to arrogantly walk around like you can't judge me, only God can judge, because I just don't know that you want to fall in the judgment of the living God. Okay, that's really good. Harsh.
That's good. I have a question that I don't know the answer to. How old is David in this story? Do you remember? I feel like that was mentioned at some point.
Where are we talking about the
one for today?
We're not in the one today yet. I wonder if she's not mentioning, because we haven't even mentioned what we're going through yet, have we?
No, the chapter 24, like what we preached on.
Oh, preaching. I honestly do not know. I would be taking a complete guess. I'd have to look into that.
That's a good question.
Who sent that? Nico.
Yeah.
Nico, that would be, I bet you if you Googled the chapter and how old David is, it would probably tell you pretty quickly. And we could do that too, but I'm on Facebook Live reading your comments.
Another question from Taylor. Is Travis a bit cold from the plunge wearing that hat? ?
So the plunge was, honestly, the lead up to the plunge was the worse than going in. I mean, while I'm driving over there, I'm like, this was a terrible idea. And like, I was partly chattering because it was cold outside, but it was just like the adrenaline and the nervousness of like going in. Me and Fink were just almost shaking about thinking what was going to happen, but it was extremely cold. Funny thing, when we got out, it felt so warm outside, because it was so cold in the water that when we stood around, it felt warm just standing outside. It was 45 degrees.
Whoa.
But then when I got back to the church, I went back to the T campus, all of a sudden I was sitting there, I was fully dressed, and my toes just started going numb on me, and my fingers, I couldn't type. And I was like, I texted Fink, I said, my body is shutting down right now. And so I actually went to
Am I dying right now?
I went to the Get and Go and got a decaf coffee. And I then I felt better. It warmed me up. The coffee warmed me up.
That's so cool. I do have to brag, like just on the church, it's pretty cool. Like those 44 students, in addition to however many, I mean, it's like around 400 students, I believe, between the two schools, 400 students.
Yeah.
And that's just so cool that we get to be a part of that. Like, that's a huge deal. So, I mean, everybody could not stop laughing. And also, just to confess, I didn't personally, because I would never do this, but many people have found joy in your scream when you first got in the lake, including our Kylie Breams, to give Kylie a shout out. She like loves that scream that you let out when you got in the water. She told me she's going to make it into a ringtone. And then anytime I call her, it's going to go, ah! That's good. That's good. That will brighten everyone's day.
Yeah, that's good. We had a couple other questions here. Someone just asked, let's do more online Bible studies. This has been amazing. Well, thanks, Gretchen. I'm glad that you have enjoyed it. So we are going to hop into chapter 28. So that's on page 120 on your yellow books, chapter 28, which is one of the more odd passages in almost the entire Bible. I mean, it's an odd passage, but it's a really interesting passage as well. A lot of questions will come up from that, but would love to, this is on page 120, chapter 28. And if you have questions, type them in. It's awesome. Like, this is so much more fun and interactive when we get to hear your questions. There's a little bit of a delay, like a 2 or 3 minute delay. So it might take a few minutes for us to see your question.
Yeah, definitely send in questions, things that stick out to you, or just even random thoughts too.
Yeah. Okay, let's get going in chapter 28. Chapter 28, verse 1. In those days, the Philistines gathered their forces to fight against Israel. Achish said to David, "You must understand that you and your men will accompany me in the army." David said, "Then you will see for yourself what your servant can do." Achish replied, I'm butchering that, I'm sure, "Very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life." Okay, what's going on here? So this kind of ties into your message today. So David left Israel, and he went into the Philistines, and he started serving with this Achish, who was like a general in the Philistine army. So he was actually serving with the Philistines at this point. And now the Philistines are coming against the army of Israel, but they have David on their side now. But this guy Achish, and I know I'm pronouncing his name wrong, but he's questioning. He's like, David, are you going to be with us or not with us? Like, seriously, are you going to be with us or not? Are you going to fight against Israel? And so that's kind of what's happening here.
So this is, if you heard the message this morning, this is the chapter after that last set of scripture I talked about of David leaves only when he has to. So this is right after he has left.
Yeah.
That helps me too.
Yep. And so, okay, we'll continue reading. Verse 3. Now Samuel was dead, and all of Israel had mourned for him and buried him in his town of Ramah. Saul had expelled all the Medians and the Spiritists from the land. Don't forget that. That's a very important part. Saul had expelled the Medians and the Spiritists from the land.
I love Saul. Keep going.
Yeah, I mean, Saul is, what did you say about, talk about what we looked up.
I'll look it up. You go do that.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Verse 4, the Philistines assembled and came and set up camp at Shunem, while Saul gathered all of Israel and set up camp at Gilboa. When Saul saw the Philistine army, he was afraid, and terror filled his heart. So a little bit, so if you would know the geography here, basically Saul set up on a hill where he could see the entire Philistine army. So this is a very mountainous, hilly region. So Saul is like, he's got the high ground. So he's like up here and he can see the Philistine army, which is great. Like he has got the high ground so he can see the Philistine army. The only thing that's not great is the Philistine army is huge. Like, huge. And so it's great to know your enemy until you know like they're way bigger than you.
Sometimes it's just good to be ignorant.
Sometimes it's better. So he was afraid, and it says terror filled his heart. I don't know like what modern day that would be, but you're going up against someone and you know there's no chance. You have no chance. You are completely outnumbered. That is where Saul was at. Saul inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him by dreams or Urim or prophets. So the Lord didn't answer him by dreams or prophets or this thing called Urim. I looked this up. Do you know what that is?
No, I was wondering the same thing.
So
Tell me
Urim was a device that the priest would have over their heart. They would like wear, I think it was on a chain, and it would kind of tell them what to do. So the priest would like have this like Urim around their heart. There's not a lot of information about it because it's not in the Bible a lot. It's more like just kind of Jewish history. But they would have this thing, and it would have like these gems in it, and it would kind of tell them like what they should do and when they should do. So they would like consult this Urim that would be for the priest. But one of the commentaries said Saul probably had that himself because he had killed so many of the priests in Israel that there was very few priests left that he could even consult. So he wasn't even consulting a priest. He was just consulting this little piece of jewelry, and it wasn't telling him anything. So Saul, what is Saul?
Yeah, so just to kind of give you some backstory. So I walked through the message again on last Thursday night, and I asked Travis here, because he's my filter, if I can use... Can I say what I was going to ask?
Sure. Yeah. And then immediately say what I told you. Yeah.
So I said, I'm just asking. I said,
because you didn't know.
This is adults only. Okay. Tell your kids to hide for a second. I said, is it okay for me to say that Saul is a tool bag?
Yeah.
That's what I said. And he's like, I don't know about bag, but you can say tool maybe. So then he searched.
And you definitely should not have called him a tool bag when we looked up the Urban Dictionary, what that was. Just saying, like we looked it up and we're like, no, you can't say that.
So then Waltner sends me a link from Urban Dictionary of the definition of tool. And it was so crazy because it is so dead on who Saul is.
Yeah.
So let me just read this, what it says about tool. And I swear this is like a biblical commentary of who Saul is. It says tool, a guy with a hugely overinflated ego who in an attempt to get undue attention for himself will act like a jack donkey, because in his deluded state, he will think it's going to make him look cool or make others want to be like him. The person may even insincerely apologize later. Exactly what we talked about this morning, but only in an attempt to get more attention or to excuse his blatantly intentional and unrepentantly toolish behavior.
The toolish behavior.
So he sends me this, and then he's like, this is exactly Saul. And I read it, and I was in a coffee shop. I could not stop laughing.
If we would have found that on Wednesday, that would have made it in the message. It was just too late to get it in the message, but it was it was
too late.
Funny. So Saul is a bit of a tool. So
we can say tool. You can't say
the other. Yeah, we don't want to say that. So he inquired of dreams, Urim prophets, verse 7. And Saul said to his attendants, find me a woman who is a medium, so I may go inquire of her. So Saul has rid the entire land of Israel of mediums and spiritists, because you wouldn't have gone to them, because you would have sought the counsel of the Lord. You wouldn't have sought the counsel of a medium or a spiritist. So he rid all of Israel of them, but now he is looking for them because he has nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
I just think that applies to our lives so much. How often do we feel like we haven't heard from God, or God has left us, so we go to something else?
Oh, 1,000%.
How would you see that practically in our...
Well, and he does so after not being faithful to God for how long? Completely disobeying God for how long? He then gets scared, asks God, doesn't hear from God, immediately takes things into his own hands. So I think a couple things. Is it a shock to you that God's not speaking when you've done and lived a life totally apart from what God has for us? We hear God's voice. We're able to most clearly hear his voice when we have intimacy in relationship with him. Prior to this, there's no repentant heart. Here's what's so great about Jesus. At any point we can say, God, I confess I've screwed up. I need you in my life. Immediate intimacy with God. We're in relationship with him. None of that is there for Saul. And so it's like, is it any shock that you're not hearing from God? And instead of waiting and saying, God, maybe I've screwed up, like maybe there's something wrong, again, he immediately takes things into his own hands. Mm-hmm. And I feel like as pastors, we see it constantly, but we also see it in our own lives. It's like God, I'm looking for direction on this. Okay, you didn't get back to me in 2 seconds. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go listen to what I want to do. I want to go. And it's like, you haven't even given God the ability to speak. Mm-hmm. And I think for me in my own life, not even what I see in the lives of so many people, it's just that constantly taking things into my own hands. Mm-hmm. If things don't turn out how I want to on my timeline, I just do what I please. And it's not a good, it's not a good way to live.
Yeah.
You answer your own question. That's like, what are you thinking?
Well, no, I think you're right. I think Saul constantly, you see, even we talked about this passage from this past Sunday, and it seems like Saul's repentant, but he just isn't.
Yeah.
He just never changes. Like he says the right things, but he never changes. And so there was just that sense, like he never changed before the Lord. He never changed his ways. He just continued on in them. I think a lot of times, like, if we are not hearing from God, or we're far from God, we'll probably go to like self-help talk shows, or we'll go to celebrities,
Entertainment Tonight.
Yep. Or like we'll go to the friend that we know we really shouldn't listen to. Like there's just all these other places that we will go, maybe because we're just far away from the Lord and we haven't repented and been close to him. And I mean, even in this, I saw some, so in Deuteronomy 18, it says, do not consult a medium. In Leviticus 20, it says, do not whore after a medium, cut him off. And so you always got to remember, like, God was so concerned that the Israelites were going to become like the other nations, and then basically God would be lost, right? Yeah. And so we set up these strict rules. He's like, no, you seek guidance from the Lord, not from a medium. And so he set up these rules, and it was very much like he's so strong, like you are committing adultery with me when you go to a medium. And so that's what Saul was doing. He was really, I mean, for lack of a better word, whoring himself to someone someone else, which is a really strong way to put it.
I just think in our dating relationships, marriage relationships, career advice, private life, and what's okay with pornography and texting someone that you're not married to, like who are we listening to, and are we listening to God, or are we quick to listen to anybody that will tell us what we want to hear? And when God is silent, do we wait on him, or do we just kind of bulldoze ahead? And I'm definitely a bulldozer, so that speaks to me. But I just think what Saul's doing here is not totally foreign to us at all.
Yeah. So once again, there's a lot going on in these passages. If you have any questions, write those in the comments. We would love to try to answer some of your questions. So this is great. I'm just going to get like a half a verse in. So Saul disguised himself, put on other clothing, and at night he and 2 men went to the woman. I mean, listen, he disguised himself, put on other clothing, and went out at night. Like just the secretness of the sin, right? The secretness of not being with God. Like when we get to that place in our lives, that's a very dark place to be.
Really dark place to be. Yeah, and I think when we begin to hide stuff like this and do things like this, I pray it just be a biggest red flag to us possible. Just like, what are you doing? Where are you going? Yeah.
And just to know, like, I don't think that God would have ever reinstated Saul as king, because his character, he had sacrificed too much in his life, but God would have brought him back into a relationship with him.
Yes.
If he would have repented. Like there's always time. Like if you're listening to this and you're in a dark place, like God is always there. You can always turn around. And as a church, we want to be a place where people can do that, where they can turn around and find God. Even if you are disguising yourself, putting on other clothes, and you're going out at night and doing things you shouldn't be doing, like you can always turn around. Like God is there. Yeah. There could be some loss. Yeah. Like that's just the way it is. Sometimes we lose some things when we come into light, but we get God. Yeah. Because Saul's story does not end well.
No. Yeah. The path that he ends and continues on is not good. And that's so true. At any point, we can turn around. And I mean, even David in 2 Samuel, we mentioned, he makes a whole lot of poor decisions, but when he's confronted about it, there's a repentant heart. And that's the difference between how his story ends and how Saul's ends.
Yeah. Taylor said, when we feel far from God, we search for things to fill the void, which ultimately brings us further from him. Yeah, I think that's a good picture of what Saul is. He's afraid, and he's trying to find something to help him figure out how to move. Yeah,
such a good word. And on that, Megan said snowball effect. That's so true. It goes from bad to worse to worse to worse.
Yeah.
That's good. Thanks, Sarah.
Consult the Spirit for me, he said, and bring up for me the one I name. But the woman said to him, so this is the medium, surely you know what Saul has done. She doesn't recognize it's Saul yet. He has cut off the mediums and the spiritists from the land. Why have you set a trap for my life to bring about my death? Then Saul swore to her by the Lord. Now this is... like literally, the word Lord, I wish we would translate that more correctly. Like that is, he swore in the name of Yahweh. Yeah. Like the God, like Lord is just such a vanilla term. At least it is to me. So often, like literally he swore by the name of Yahweh. Like he can't even hear God's voice. He's not even in relationship with him. He's seeking guidance from like the occult. and he swears by the Lord, the name's Yahweh. Like how messed up that is.
It's pretty messed up. And talk about the conviction of God. This is what I love about God. He sends people in our path of saying, surely you know when what Saul has done. You know, like I thank God for those moments where he highlights it. I mean, think about how Saul must have felt when she said that. Like, oh my gosh. You know what I'm saying?
It'd be almost like you teaching someone in your life something really important, like, you know, how to love their wife, and then you're being a whole tool to your wife, and they say, hey, I learned this from you. Hey, I learned to treat my wife this way because of you, and then you realize you're not even doing that anymore. Did that make sense? I don't know if that made sense.
No, it did.
And it's like that's almost what's happening there. It's like
And I think that's God's kindness to us. Yeah. I think that's God's kindness when he does those those moments.
Yeah. So Saul swore to her by the name of Yahweh, as surely as the Lord lives, you will not be punished for this, which he had no authority to say. Then the woman asked, whom shall I bring up for you? Bring up Samuel, he said. So we know, was this last week that Samuel left him? He mourned over him, and he never saw him again, Saul.
Yep.
Again, and he died until a little bit here. Verse 12. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out at the top of her voice and said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. The king said to her, don't be afraid. What do you see? The woman said, I see a ghostly figure coming up out of the earth.
This gets crazy.
Maybe this is a good point to stop. Do you believe in mediums? Do you believe in spiritists, people that can talk to the dead?
Oh my gosh. I think about, for some reason, the first thing that comes to mind is, what is it? The movie Ghost with Whoopi Goldberg.
That's fake, but yes. Yes.
I don't know. What do you think?
I think yes. So that's interesting because there's a lot of debate on this passage.
This is big.
Some people think that the medium didn't ever really see something and this was a one-time event, which it could have been.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like, I just believe in the supernatural.
I
believe that there's. I heard a guy, and this is a level-head. It was an apologetics guy, and someone said, "How can you believe in the supernatural?" And this apologetics guy, who's like scientific thinking, he's like, "Well, get involved in the cult, and you'll believe in the supernatural really fast." He's like, because there is a lot of crazy stuff that happens in the occult and talking to the dead and stuff like that. So I don't know. Like, I'd have to think a little bit more. But I think that stuff happens, and it's not to be messed around with. Yeah, at all.
No, not to be messed around with at all. Yeah, that's a good word. I didn't know that. I didn't expect that question to be asked.
Yeah, okay. You'll have to think. In the comments below, tell me what you think about mediums and the occult.
Yeah.
Megan Bess Clark says, completely throwing his own words back at him after what you said. Yeah,
that's so true.
Verse 14, that's on the next page. What does he look like, he asked. An old man wearing a robe is coming up, she said. I read this in the commentary. That word robe refers back. It's the only other time it was used is when it talks about when Saul grabbed Samuel's robe and ripped it. So it's kind of a callback. Like, he's using like this word to remember the last time they met, and Saul grabbed his robe and ripped it off. Then Saul knew it was Samuel, and he bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? I had a note there, but it didn't make sense, so I'm going to continue on. I am in great distress, Saul said. The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has departed from me. He no longer answers me either by the prophets or by dreams, so I have called on you to tell me what to do. Samuel said, why do you consult me now that the Lord has departed from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done what he predicted through me. The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hands and given it to one of your neighbors, to David. Because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce wrath against the Amalekites. I nailed it that time. I practiced it. The Lord has done this to you today. The Lord will deliver both Israel and you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me.
That's powerful. For me to see in the place that Saul is, and he's just reaping the consequences of his actions. I mean, he's just stating the obvious. Like, I'm in distress. God has departed from me. And he's just reaching at anything he possibly can. And then Samuel's words are like brutally intense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
so he goes to Samuel to say, what should I do? And Samuel tells him what's going to be done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not like, I mean, the first time I read this, I didn't catch this.
Yeah.
Tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. What's that mean? I mean, where's Saul? Samuel. He's dead.
Yeah.
And that's what happens.
Yeah.
The Philistine takes him. He kills his sons, one of them Jonathan, which we never got to. Jonathan was a great friend of David.
Yeah.
And then Saul takes his own life in this battle.
Yeah. No, it's heavy. And I think oftentimes we downplay the role of God as judge and God as holy. And we have to hold that in balance with God is love, and he's grace, and he's forgiveness. Like, he is holy and he is righteous. And I think it's easy to think about the first part of him being love and grace and mercy, but it's not always as easy to think about him being just and sovereign, and yet he is. And that's huge.
This is a hard thing to say, so give me some grace in how I say this. It could be that one of the most loving things that God could do for Israel is to let Saul die. Because he is so like not leading his people to the Lord.
Yeah.
And now that seems backwards, like, because it doesn't seem, but it's like for him to actually care for Israel, they needed a new king.
Yeah.
They needed something different. And so in a backwards way, like, it was merciful for so many more.
Yeah.
Than it was for him. If it seems harsh what's happening to Saul, just think of how he was misleading all the Israelites, you know?
And again, where we're at in the story is not God's plan. This is us as humans and what sin does in our lives. Like, this is not God's ultimate, like, here's the best way for this to go. We have sin in our lives, and sin has consequences. You know, when we live outside of God's will, outside of God's plan, there are consequences that come with it.
It's sort of like we did a series back this past summer. I'm forgetting the name of it, but we had the Broken Vase. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
The Broken Vase, and this idea of the vase being put together, but all the cracks remaining.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you see in the Bible over and over. Like, God's plan is he's putting together a broken vase.
Yeah.
And it's the cracks and all the brokenness, and he's working out this plan in the midst of our sin. And it's really hard to understand how that works out, but that's what he's doing. And parts of that are really ugly.
Yeah.
But he can make them really good in the same breath. So.
Yeah, well, that's good.
So tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will also give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistine. And here I think, like, besides the ending where Saul, if you read the last chapters, and Saul ends up basically falling on his sword to kill himself because he's about ready to be killed. This is one of the saddest moments, I feel like. Immediately Saul fell full length on the ground, filled with fear because of Samuel's words. His strength was gone, for he had eaten nothing all that day and all that night. Just trying to imagine Saul in that moment, like, literally, like, he's got an army of Philistines that he knows intellectually that he can't take. And now Samuel has said, you're going to die tomorrow in battle. Just the end of his rope completely. And I think of, like, how often we get there sometimes, you know, like when we don't obey God and we get to, and, you know, like, you and I have talked to people before, would have maybe gotten in such a dark place to sin where they're at this point.
Oh yeah.
You know, this verse 20, and there's like, the strength was gone.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's seeing total hopelessness.
Yep.
Total, like, you know, the joy of the Lord is our strength, having none of that, like, just being totally rock bottom. And yet again, even in this moment, like, Saul could cry out. It may still happen, but Saul could still cry out. I think about the criminals hanging next to Jesus, you know, even in those final moments. One of the criminals is criticizing Jesus, and the other says, remember me. Like, just, and I just think of the grace of God at any time that we can cry out, and we're never too far gone. I mean, you know, I've sat with people who are headed to prison, and it's to be able to tell them, like, God's not done with you yet. Like, like, he's not done with you even now, and you're going to be serving time, but God's not done with you yet, and there's still hope if you turn to him. But if you continue on your own way, whoever that person is, I mean, darkness just gets darker and darker and darker.
Yeah. I think, like, if you've ever found yourself in a verse 20 moment, just to know that you can always turn back to God. Like,
Oh, yeah.
that's the main thing of Saul. He just has had moment after moment after moment, and he doesn't turn back to God. I think that's one of the great lessons in this. Like, you can always turn back to him. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people in this moment, and then they've reached out to a pastor. Like, that's turning back to God. Not that we're God, but we can help point in that direction. Like, it's never too late to turn back to him. And even the criminal on the cross is one of the best stories, because all he had was hours, maybe a day. I don't know how long he hung. Yeah. But Jesus says, I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise. He still died on the cross. The criminal did, as far as we know. But he was with Jesus in paradise. You can always turn back.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank God we can.
Yep. Verse 21. When the woman came to Saul and saw that he was greatly shaken, she said, "Look, your servant has obeyed you. I took my life in my hands and did what you told me to do. Now please listen to your servant and let me give you some food so you may eat and have the strength to go on your way." But Saul refused and said, "I will not eat." But his men joined the women in urging him, and he listened to them. He got up from the ground and sat on the couch. The woman had a fattened calf at the house, which she butchered at once. She took some flour, kneaded it, and baked bread without yeast. Then she set it before Saul and his men, and they ate. That same night they got up and left. So that's the end of chapter 28. How it ends is there's a part about David where David's about ready to go out to battle against Israel, but the Philistines won't let him, and they send him back away.
Yeah.
They make him go home. And the Amalekites have actually ransacked the place again. Once again, like, don't understand why God told to kill the Amalekites, kill them all, but they continually are doing harm to everybody.
Yeah.
And so David goes away, and then the battle happens with Saul, and Saul's sons are killed, and then Saul, the people are coming against Saul, and then he kills himself with the sword. And that's how 1 Samuel ends. What kind of movie would end that way? I'm trying to figure out a movie that ends
I can't imagine
in such
if you got to the end and it was like that. Zach, our tech guy, you got any movies that end like that? Not at the moment.
You think about it. Let us know a movie that just ends this way. Like, oh my goodness, that is
what is the resolve here? And no, it is. It does. And then what you're going to find out is David, even in this moment, ends up honoring Saul, which is so hard to comprehend and wrap your mind around. After everything that's been done to him, he still honors and grieves the loss of Saul. And for me, one of the main things I want to end with is just we've read through a book of the Bible now, and if you haven't been reading, even though the series is now done, you can continue reading. I've been reading it each day throughout since we've started the series, and it's been even powerful for me, even though I've gone through it a few times just recently, even just to go through it again. But just the importance of Scripture every single day is what I can't stress enough. So I would challenge you, if you've gone through 1 Samuel, first off, finish the rest of it, just reading a chapter a day. But then switch to 2 Samuel. Read the book of 2 Samuel, or go to John, the Gospel of John, or read through the Psalms. Like even for me, there's been just in this reading plan, it's ministered to me big time. Mm-hmm. Even away from us doing the series, just reading through it myself. And so that'd be my biggest word of encouragement. Yeah. It's just the importance every day, even if it's the end of the day and you're like, man, I didn't read it this morning. Just go read it. Not for the sake of checking a box, but for the sake of really recentering yourself on God.
Mm-hmm. And 2 Samuel gets more into David's reign, the building of the temple, the crap that happens in David's life. You alluded to that. David has an affair with Bathsheba and tries to kill her husband. Not good. And then into Solomon and some of that. Solomon would be David's son. But then eventually after Solomon, I think it's right after Solomon, the kingdom splits into the north and the south, Israel. And so the kingdom stays split. The northern Israel ends up just disappearing. And what we know of Israel now is the southern portion, Judea. And then it's turmoil, waiting for the Messiah to come, waiting for the future king to take back Israel.
Yeah.
Of course, he didn't come back to take back Israel. He came back to take the world. So it's such a beautiful story when you put it in context of Jesus. So one question on here, this doesn't really pertain to the study, but what is the plan for Good Friday online? So we're doing one Good Friday service for all 3 campuses here at 57th Street. It's going to be a worship time, Good Friday worship time, and I've seen the plan. It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be awesome.
It is going to be great. We'll also broadcast that online, though, so you'll be able to watch it online just like you do a regular service. So it's going to be a good one.
Yeah.
Any parting thoughts?
No, just excited, and it's been just really cool walking through. It's been so cool, even on Sundays, seeing people walk in with their yellow copy of 1 Samuel. That's been something that's ministered to me, and just even like growing deeper in your relationship with Jesus. It's spending time with God, and then it's living it out. And so my hope is the 4 messages we've talked about on Sundays, the different things that have stuck out to you throughout the readings, just begin to implement them in your life. Honor instead of attack. Humbly speak up. I mean, just be living out the things that you've learned. That'd be my encouragement.
Awesome. I'll pray for us. God, thank you for this time where we could open your word. Thank you for the lessons that we can learn for 2 Samuel. Once again, it's so easy to look at Saul and just be like, what a tool, even us joking, what a tool. But like Adam said, we got a lot more Saul in us than we want to admit. And we're capable of being like Saul and being at the darkest place and not turning back to you. God, guard us from that. Everyone that's listening, guard us from the dark place that Saul went. Help us to always, even when we sin, even when we're in the darkest place, to turn back to you, repent to you, to come back. God, never make us so proud that we can't humble ourselves and come back to you, God. We lift these things up in your name. Amen. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a good one.
Hey everyone, it's Adam from Embrace. If you enjoyed today's message, make sure to subscribe to Embrace's YouTube channel to stay updated. You can also click here to check out other videos. Thanks for watching.